Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a snowstorm which is going to be taking place in parts of the northern plains and the Rockies for this afternoon into Monday, and that might even linger into Tuesday as well. So today's Halloween, so you might even have a little bit of snow as you're going trick-or-treating, especially in Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska. Those areas will probably get the snowfall a little bit earlier, and then we'll see on whether or not areas like Kansas or Missouri may even get in on some snowfall. It looks like they have a lower chance at anything accumulating, but definitely the snowfall threat is still there. We're actually going to be going over my snowfall forecast at the end of today's video as well. So there has been enough consistency over the past couple of days that I do feel confident enough to put out a snow forecast. If you guys have any personal comments or questions, just leave them in the comment section and I'll be responding within a few hours of you posting them. So let's get right into it, and let's start off with your current National Weather Service page. Now, we have some freeze warnings up for a little bit of northern Illinois. We have some flood watches and advisories in the Northeast. And then we have some frost advisories in parts of Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska. We also have some winter weather advisories in effect for some parts of Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And then other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings. I don't think this will get up to winter storm warning criteria, just because even though some of the models are showing 6+ inches of snowfall, when you take into account that it's going to be 32 or 33 degrees when it's snowing, it does make it a little bit more dicey on whether 6 inches will actually accumulate or whether it'll be more of a 3 to 5 inch type of event, which is what I'm predicting for some of these areas. Now, the second question is, how far south does the snow get? We have models like the Euro, which are bringing it into northern Kansas, and then the NAM model, for example, brings that same strip of snow, but a little bit further north into northwestern Missouri and southern Nebraska. So there's a couple questions that are still left unanswered. Either way, it would not be a significant snowfall in either of those two areas. So we're going to discuss that a little bit later on in the video. Yesterday, we had a high temperature of 93 degrees in Rio Grande Village, Texas, Falcon Lake, Texas, and 17 miles east of Brawley, California. Again, all of them got up to 93 degrees. The low temperature was 10 degrees in Antero Reservoir, Colorado. The highest rainfall report was 3.16 inches of rain in Golden Beach, Maryland. And then the highest snowfall report was 3 inches, 6 miles east-northeast of Harv, Montana, and again they got 3 inches of snowfall out of that one. So here's a look at the current expectation for the satellite as we get to around noontime today. So this is 12 p.m. Eastern Time, which would be approximately 9 a.m. Mountain Time or 10 a.m. Central Time for these areas. So you still have some lingering snow showers, and these are actually going to start to expand. Now, what you don't see is that we do have a little wave of energy, which is approximately right here by this point. So as this slides to the east, it's going to pick up all this moisture, which is already in Nebraska and Wyoming, and it's going to kind of fuel it up. So these areas are going to start to get more moderate and even heavier bands of snowfall as we get into the later part of today. So right in time for that trick-or-treating time period. So here to be for around 12 p.m. Mountain Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can see that we have for eastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, some of that snow mixing in with rainfall. It's going to be a heavy and wet snow to start off, turning into more of a fluffier snowfall as we get to around Monday morning. So to start it off, areas like North Platte, Scotts Bluff, Cheyenne, Wyoming, all these areas are going to be in a fairly wet snowfall, falling at about light to moderate rates. We're not looking at anything heavy up to this point, and that might even be mixing in with some rain. And that is, again, because we're still in the daytime. So we still have that sun, which we still have to battle. So if we go into the evening hours, you would expect that a lot of these areas much further to the south will actually be below freezing and therefore get into a little bit of snowfall, which is what the NAM model does. So here's your forecast for about 5 p.m. Mountain Time today. Not looking at a lot on the screen, so it does kind of fizzle out by that point. If we move this on a little bit more, you can see that we're still dealing with some amount of snowfall into these areas by around 7 or 8 p.m. Mountain Time today. We have in western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, some of that lingering snowfall. And then we start to see this really ramp up as we get to the late evening hours. So we're looking at about 9 or 10 p.m. Mountain Time, 10 or 11 Central Time. And we're dealing with moderate to even heavy at times snowfall, pretty much from anywhere from North Platte on westward. So you can basically cut the state of Nebraska into 3 sections. And on that westernmost section, once you get west of there, you start to get in on some of that snowfall. Eventually, that will actually spread even into areas that are further south in Nebraska. So it might be a little bit too dry, basically north of this line, but you get south of there, you do have enough moisture. Combine that with some of the colder temperatures, and you could definitely see some snowfall. I also do want to point out that if you live in the Great Lakes, we will have some lake effect, not necessarily coming off the Great Lakes, although that will be the case in areas like the UP of Michigan, but in areas like Minnesota and Manitoba, Ontario, and Canada, these areas are actually going to have snow coming off of the bigger sized lakes, not necessarily the Great Lakes, but just kind of these smaller to medium sized lakes up in Canada with strong northwesterly winds. You'll be able to get maybe a quick coating to 2 inches of snow. So northern Minnesota, the UP of Michigan, northernmost Wisconsin, you might get in on a little bit of snowfall. Nothing that's going to be too major, but it will at least make it a little bit more of a pretty Monday morning as you wake up and you have a little bit of snow on the ground. I don't think it's going to be too bad because it's not going to really add up to too much, maybe 1 or 2 inches at the most in some spots. Now, if we move this on to about midnight, and you're looking at still some of that heavy to moderate snowfall in western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, so it is starting to add up by this point. Now, we've definitely gotten at least some amount of snowfall on the ground by this point in areas like western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, northern Colorado, but we're still probably getting that first layer on the ground in areas like central Nebraska, southern Nebraska. So we still haven't gotten that first layer. Once you get that initial layer of snowfall, it's much easier for everything else to accumulate, but it's really going to have to wait until that first initial inch of snow, or even that first initial half inch of snow to fall. And then after that, pretty much everything else that comes from the air is going to eventually drop down to the ground and actually stick. Unlike the first few inches where you start to get some of that snowfall, but some of it might be melting on contact, so you're actually losing some amount of snowfall. And that does not get taken into account by these models. So we're going to look at these snowfall maps from these models, and what you're not going to see is how much is actually going to accumulate on your porch or on your car or on your driveway or on the grass. It's just going to show you how much snow should have fallen if these snowfall rates were correct. So that's, again, not necessarily going to be how much actually falls. And in my snowfall forecast, I take into account things like melting and the sun angle that we're going to be dealing with, especially earlier on in the day, that might affect some of the snowfall totals. Now, moving this on to about 3 or 4 in the morning, you can see that much of Nebraska now covered with snowfall. Now, I'm a little bit more dicey on whether this is actually going to happen. If in eastern Nebraska, you're actually going to get some of that snowfall from areas like Omaha and Lincoln on westward, that is going to be a little bit more of a question. If it were to snow, this area, even on the NAM model, is still dealing with temperatures at about 33 or 34 degrees. So you're not below freezing in most of these spots, so you will probably have a switch from rain to snow. Now, something that the NAM model does not do, which others do, it does not show the rain snow mix. So it's only going to show you snow or rain. It's not going to really show you a mix of those two, even though you can presume that based off these temperatures, this area right here would probably be in a snow rain mix, and not all of this would be coming down in the form of straight snowfall. So you would probably have some rain and maybe even ice pellets mixing in there. Now, if we move this on to about 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Mountain Time and Central Time for Nebraska, even maybe a little bit of Iowa and Missouri getting in on some of the snowfall. And again, whether or not you get snowfall in some of these areas, that's a little bit more questionable. And the European model does show something similar with the eastern edge of snowfall, although it does shift it further to the south. So now instead of areas like eastern Nebraska getting in on the snowfall, it moves it down into eastern Kansas. So you kind of have a line of snow through Kansas. I don't think that's as likely as what the NAM is showing, just because if you were to see snowfall get that far south, you would need to push this entire storm further to the south, because you would have high pressure to the north, which would have to be a little bit more dominant. So the chances of you getting that cold in Kansas is lower than it would be in, let's say, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska. So just based off pure chance, I think it's a higher chance that those areas see some flakes flying rather than central or southern Kansas. Although, again, that is still a possibility, of course. Either way, these areas, no matter whether it happened in Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, all of these areas would be dealing with pretty much little to no accumulation. It would be a very, very hard snow to actually accumulate, but it might make the morning commute on Monday a little bit more interesting, because you will have to contend with the mixture of rain and snow. And for a lot of areas, this is your first snowfall of the season, and definitely in areas like Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, this would be your first snowfall of the season. So it is going to get maybe the first couple of snow events. It is a little bit hard to get used to. And then once you get further into the winter, it's pretty much not that big of a deal when you have a little bit of snow. But the first couple do kind of catch you off guard, especially if it happens like this, where you wake up the next morning and it's snowing, and this storm is not getting a lot of coverage from most of the news sources, but that could cause some issues if not a lot of people know about it, and it's just kind of a surprise storm like this one could be in eastern Nebraska. Then that of course could cause some issues. So I'm trying to warn as many people as possible for at least a threat. I don't think anything is going to accumulate in those spots, but at least the threat of a little bit more of a slick commute tomorrow, tomorrow morning. As we move this on to 9 or 10 a.m., we're looking at northern Missouri, southern Iowa getting in on some of the heavier snowfall according to this model. Now, again, I'm thinking this is going to be more of a rain-snow mix, and the NAM model on this one, at least, does not show any kind of pink zone where you have the rain and snow mix. So it's just going to go straight from rain to snow on this model, even though we know in real life there's probably a little bit of a 5 or 10 mile boundary zone where you're getting a mixture of rain and snow. So you want to take that with a grain of salt. You probably will have some more mixing than what is being shown on this model. And then you kind of see those two systems separate. You have maybe some lingering snow into central Nebraska by noon tomorrow. But again, nothing too crazy in terms of additional snowfall behind the system. Now, if we move this on to Tuesday and we look at the total snowfall through all of that according to the NAM, you can see that we're looking at about 1/10 of an inch to 2 inches in that gray color, about 2 to 6 inches in the blue, and then once you get into the purple, that's 6 to 10 inches of snowfall. So we're looking at mainly a 2 to 5 inch event through western Nebraska. So again, this is what the model is indicating. If the snowfall rates were to be correct, if we were to see an exact 10 to 1 ratio, which we know the ratio is probably going to be closer to 7 to 1 or 8 to 1, especially in these areas further to the east. And then also, if you were to have no issues with the sun, maybe warming some surfaces up a little bit so that you have to contend with melting. If none of that was an issue, then you might get 6 or 7 inches of snowfall in an area like in southwestern Nebraska. But we know that those are going to be issues, especially at the start of the storm in these areas. So I would cut off a couple inches, maybe 2 or 3, if you live in these spots, especially if you live further to the east. I would say that most of these spots over here probably not dealing with a whole lot in terms of accumulation. And even if we look at the European model, which has that more southerly approach to what actually happens, western Nebraska is pretty much nailed down in terms of seeing snowfall. It's fairly certain that you're going to see at least maybe 2 or 3 inches of snowfall depending on where you are. But again, this area right here, this is where we have the troubles. But even if you look at the European, it's showing a dusting to maybe 2 inches. And if we look at the potential of how much is actually going to accumulate, I would say up to 1/2 inch in a lot of these spots, mostly in grassy surfaces. So you're probably not too much on the roads. So I don't think it's going to really be too big of an issue. Again, it might cause a slick commute just because it is the first snowfall of the season. Might catch some people off guard because I know a lot of sources are not covering this storm because they really want to cover more some of the temperature patterns or things like that, because that would get them more views. It's covering a larger area, but it is important to cover even these smaller, more localized systems because, again, it does catch some people off guard, and I really have not seen too much coverage. I'm not sure about the local news, but at least with the national news, there really hasn't been a lot of talk about the system on different weather sources. Now, if you look at my forecast, I'm looking at mountain snow. This is a given for these areas in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana. I just put that up there because it would be too much of a pain to go in and try and draw each individual mountaintop with the snowfall, so I'll just give it a broad brush of mountain snow in those spots. Less than 3 inches of snowfall if you live in an area like central and western Nebraska, northeastern Colorado, maybe even the westernmost tip of Kansas, much of Wyoming, and then some of the surrounding areas as well, including some of southwestern South Dakota. I think especially in the Black Hills, you could definitely get maybe 2 inches of snowfall to pile up there. 3 to 5 inches of snow in this thin stripe for western Nebraska and southeastern Wyoming, and that's where I'm thinking the bullseye is going to be with this system. And again, I am taking into account how much is actually going to accumulate. So you'll see a lot of these weather people who just look at the model and then just copy and paste that and then call it their forecast, not realizing that you do have to take into account the sun melting some of that snow off while it's falling, some of the snow not sticking at first, things like that. So I don't think as much is going to accumulate as what some people are saying and what some of these models are showing as well. And then I do want to just kind of leave that mention that flakes to no accumulation is possible in an area like southeastern Colorado. I would even extend it maybe even into northern Kansas, southeastern Nebraska, northwestern Missouri. Again, I'm thinking you might see some flakes flying, but I'm not expecting anything to accumulate there. Flakes probably mixing in with rainfall for most of these areas. And I put tonight through Tuesday morning. I'm expecting this to wrap up by Monday night, but you may see in central Nebraska some of that snow linger on into the early morning hours of Tuesday. So I just wanted to leave that in just to kind of cover all bases in case some of that does linger in a little bit longer than what we're expecting as of right now. So that's my snowfall forecast. I'll be making one of these for pretty much all of the storms that we see this winter and fall season. I'm thinking that I'm probably not going to do as much snowfall forecast for things like lake effect events. So for example, I'm not making one for the upper Great Lakes for tonight and Monday just because, again, that's very localized. Lake effect is very hard to forecast, but I did do one, I think last year I probably did one. There was a lake effect event where I think parts of upstate New York got 3 or 4 feet of snowfall. I did cover that event. So if there's a really big lake effect event, I might actually cover that and I might actually make a snowfall forecast on that. But generally, I'm going to keep it to making just a snowfall forecast on the storms because those are a lot easier to forecast. Lake effect can be really sporadic. It's like trying to pinpoint where a tornado is going to touch down. You can say that there's a chance of a tornado, but you can't say exactly which town that's going to happen. And it's pretty much the same exact thing with lake effect. Wherever those bands set up, especially as you get deeper into the winter, you can have one town that gets 6 inches and the next town get maybe just an inch of snowfall. So with how localized it is, I'm going to try and stay away from the lake effect. I will still mention it here and there, but if you're looking at for individual forecasts on how much snowfall there might be, I might show the model snowfall map, but I don't think I'll make too many on my personal snowfall maps. If you have any questions or comments down below, or you have any special requests, leave them in the comment section down below. If you have any snowfall pictures, if you do live in this area and you do end up getting some snowfall, send them over to my email address, which is elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com, and that's also in the description down below. If you email me the picture of snowfall or pretty much any weather event, even if it's just a cloud or a cool sunset, especially, again, if you live in this area and you happen to get a picture of some of that snowfall that does fall, that would definitely be great. I'll feature you in the beginning of the video and just say generally what area that picture was taken from. So, for example, if it's from this storm, just say western Nebraska. You don't don't have to put a town name if you don't feel comfortable. I just want a general area so that we can kind of see where this was taken from. So again, thank you for everybody for making it to the end of the video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.